Section 2.3, Proving Theorems. The first theorem in this particular section is the midpoint theorem. If M is the midpoint of AB, then AM equals 1/2 of AB, and MB is equal to 1/2 of AB. In this particular theorem, what you're given is that M is the midpoint. Pause for just a second and tell me what the difference is between the midpoint theorem and the definition of a midpoint. Whenever you're given the midpoint theorem, you're talking about numbers. You're talking about AM being half of the whole entire segment and MB being half of the whole entire segment. You're talking about numbers. In the definition, you're saying that if M is the midpoint, A to M and M to B are congruent to each other. This leads to the converse of the midpoint theorem. This time, if AM equals 1/2 of AB and MB equals 1/2 of AB, then M has to be the midpoint of AB. This time what you're given is that these two segments are equal in length. Once you know that those two segments are equal in length, then M has to be the midpoint. M is the midpoint, that's the then. Just like we have segments, we also have bisectors of angles. So in the angle bisector theorem, if ray BX is the bisector of angle ABC, then the measure of ABX is 1/2 the measure of ABC. And the measure of angle XBC is 1/2 the measure of angle ABC. Here's the picture that you're given. You're given that BX is the bisector. Once you know that it's the bisector, then you know that those two angles are congruent to each other and they're half of the big angle. Just like we had a converse for the midpoint theorem, we have a converse for the angle bisector theorem. If the measure of ABX is equal to 1/2 of ABC, and the measure of angle XBC is 1/2 of the measure of ABC, then ray BX must be the bisector of the big angle. This time, the picture that you would be given would be this. You're given that those two angles are congruent. You're given that those two angles then have equal measure. Because they have equal measure and this big angle is cut in half, then this little angle is 1/2 of the big angle and this little angle is 1/2 of the big angle. The thing that you need to concentrate on this particular section is that there is a difference between the definition of an angle bisector and an angle bisector theorem. There's a difference between the midpoint theorem and the definition of a midpoint. Please make sure you have two separate cards for the theorem and its converse, the angle theorem and its converse, and make sure you distinguish the difference between the definition.